That afternoon, the sky above Frankfurt International Airport was windless, with thin trails of smoke stretching slowly from the wings of planes into the ashen gray sky. In the pilot's lounge, fluorescent lights cast a clean, steady glow across the polished white tile floor, calm and orderly, much like the seasoned aviators who frequented the space. 16-year-old Leo Anderson, wearing a gray windbreaker and carrying a small backpack, sat silently on a sofa in the corner. His bright eyes were fixed intently on a television screen playing a documentary about aviation history. In his hands was a guest pass that read, Leo Anderson, Horizon Aviation Career Program. It was the result of months of essay writing and careful application, a rare internship opportunity offered to outstanding students as part of a pilot training initiative. What Leo didn't know was that every quiet second in that room was about to become a turning point in his life. The door burst open suddenly. Footsteps echoed sharp, measured, cold. A tall woman with blonde hair neatly tied at the nape of her neck entered, dressed in a pilot's uniform with 4 golden stripes on her shoulder. It was Captain Ingrid Hallberg, one of Horizon Air's most seasoned pilots, known throughout the industry for her iron discipline and uncompromising severity. Ingrid stopped in the center of the room, her gray eyes sweeping quickly across Leo as if she had spotted something out of place. Her brows furrowed, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Who are you? Who gave you permission to enter this pilot's lounge?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was ice cold, every word slicing through Leo's windbreaker like a blade. Startled, Leo stood up, trying to steady his voice. "I'm Leo Anderson, part of Horizon's career training program. Miss Sophie Klein from HR brought me here and told me to wait." He hadn't even finished his sentence before Ingrid stepped forward, eyes narrowed, and abruptly yanked the ID card from around his neck. "Career program?" she scoffed coldly, flipping the card over. "Fake. Obviously. A random kid like you has no clearance to be here. This is a high security violation." Leo froze. "But I didn't." She didn't let him continue. Ingrid reached for her radio, speaking with grim urgency. "Security Center, report, unauthorized individual in the pilot's lounge. Suspected fake ID in use. Requesting immediate backup." Her voice rang across the room, sharp as a knife. All Leo felt in that moment was a cold current rushing down his spine. Faces were beginning to appear in the hallway, curious, suspicious, and more than a few filled with contempt. It was supposed to be the first day of his dream, but now it had turned into a nightmare. Leo clenched his fists, lips tightly pressed, his eyes red but refusing to shed a tear. He understood. He wasn't just facing a misunderstanding. He was facing a deeply rooted prejudice. The pilot lounge door creaked open again, this time not by a pilot but by 2 uniformed security officers in gray. They were tall, stern, and moved without the slightest hesitation. Their eyes immediately locked onto Leo, the tan-skinned teenager with boyish features, now pale with anxiety. "Young man, please come with us. We need to verify your identity." Leo stepped back, heart pounding, but tried to remain composed. I didn't do anything wrong. This is a real pass. Miss Sophie Klein from Human Resources, she brought me here." Captain Ingrid Hallberg stood with arms crossed, her voice sharp and cutting, pouring fuel on the fire. "I've never seen a student allowed into a pilot's lounge. And that badge? Easy to fake. This boy is attempting to access a restricted area, possibly with harmful intent." From the neighboring rooms, pilots and flight attendants began gathering in the hallway, peering through the glass pane. Whispers spread. Some gazes were skeptical. Others were downright judgmental. No one spoke up for Leo. He felt the room shrink around him, pressing tighter with every breath. The first security officer, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a deep voice, stepped forward. "Do you have anything to prove your claim? Who gave you this pass?" Leo pulled out his phone with trembling hands. He scrolled through his contacts to find Sophie Klein, HR. "I have her number, please, just call to confirm, I really..." Ingrid suddenly let out a mocking laugh, turning to the officers. "This script is so familiar. Now comes the part where he calls a guardian. Let me guess, your dad or mom? Maybe they're busy cleaning somewhere in this airport." Snickers broke out in the hallway. Leo felt the heat rise to his face. Ingrid's words weren't just meant to shame him, they were a slap at his family's dignity. His father worked at the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and his mother had supported every step of his journey toward his dream. He clenched his phone, voice tight with restrained fury. "My dad is not a janitor. He's an FAA flight safety coordinator. And I followed every proper procedure." "Miss Sophie." "That's enough," Ingrid cut in sharply. "Security, escort this boy out. This is a sensitive area." We can't afford to gamble on hopeful excuses. The second officer stepped in, placing a firm but gentle hand on Leo's shoulder. His voice was firm, yet more measured. You'll be taken to the administrative security office. If what you say is true, someone will verify it. But for now, you are not authorized to be here. Leo looked around one last time, his eyes searching, hoping anyone, would speak up for him. But the silence remained, and it weighed heavier than any accusation. He pressed the call button for his father. The phone began to ring. Dad, I need you. The moment the dial tone ended, a deep, steady voice rang out from the phone speaker. Leo, don't say another word. I'm on my way. Stay calm. It was the voice of Frederick Albrecht, one of the executive directors of aviation safety at the European Union Aviation Safety Agency (ESA). In that instant, Leo felt as though the entire room had slipped away from him except for his father's voice, anchoring him in the eye of the storm. He ended the call, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes. But Ingrid Hallberg, still standing with her arms crossed, pressed further. Oh, your father, is it? Still mopping floors nearby, I presume? When's he arriving? Never mind, you'll be gone before he gets here. The law doesn't wait for sympathy. Her words were loud, deliberately projected for everyone to hear. The atmosphere in the pilot lounge turned tense again, whispers, skeptical stares, and, worse still, indifference. But less than 5 minutes later, the door swung open so forcefully it startled everyone. A tall man in a sharp ash-gray suit stepped in, carrying the quiet but undeniable authority of a leader. His eyes, sharp as a razor's edge, swept across the room before landing on Leo, still standing beside the two security officers, face pale. I am Frederick Albrecht, representative of ESA and Leo's father. The room fell silent. The security officers instantly withdrew their hands from Leo's shoulders, their faces paling in shock. The whispering from the hallway stopped. Several pilots and staff outside shifted their gazes, no longer skeptical but awed and unsure. Frederick stepped forward, his commanding gaze fixed on Ingrid Hallberg. You detained my son in an area he had been legally authorized to access. You confiscated his ID badge without verifying any information. And you publicly labeled him a security threat. Do you have any idea how many protocols you just violated? Ingrid stammered. I didn't know he was your son. Frederick raised an eyebrow, cutting her off sharply. So if he wasn't my son, you would have still treated him that way? Then the issue here isn't identity, it's the color of his skin and the prejudice in your eyes, isn't it? Not a single person spoke. Frederick turned and gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You did well, Leo. You don't need to be afraid. I'll take care of the rest. It was the moment everything shifted, when accusations began to unravel. A new wind swept through the heavy silence of the pilot lounge, not the wind of power, but of justice. The air in the pilot lounge grew thick, every gaze locked onto the man with a steel-like presence, Frederick Albrecht, Executive Director of the European Union Aviation Safety Agency (ESA). Calmly, he retrieved a thin tablet from his briefcase and connected it to the wall-mounted screen. His voice rang out firm and clear. I've just requested central control to retrieve all security footage from the past 60 minutes. Television. The screen lit up. The video began playing, moment by moment. Footage showed Leo Albrecht entering the lounge accompanied by a woman in an HR uniform, Clara Weiss, head of human resources at Nordsky Airlines. Clara handed Leo a special ID badge, clearly indicated the designated seating area for him, and then exited the room. Leo sat quietly, eyes fixed on the TV, hands touching nothing but the small notebook he had brought. Finally, the footage showed Ingrid Hallberg entering, scanning the room, and then immediately calling security, snatching Leo's badge, and making severe accusations. When the video ended, not a single person spoke. The security staff lowered their heads. The nearby pilots exchanged uneasy glances. Those who had whispered, taken photos, and gossiped now stood silent. The mocking laughter and scornful stares from moments earlier had been replaced by awkwardness, even shame. Frederick turned to the security team and stated firmly, "This young man was brought here following proper procedure. The disturbance did not originate with him, but with the individual who abused her authority to make baseless accusations." One of the two security officers, the elder, bowed his head deeply. "We sincerely apologize, Mr. Albrecht. We acted without proper verification." Frederick nodded, then turned to face Ingrid directly. "Do you have anything to say, Captain Hallberg?" Ingrid stood frozen. Her face flushed, then turned pale. Finally, with a trembling voice, she stammered. I only wanted to ensure safety. I didn't realize he was a..." Frederick cut her off coldly. He's a human being. A student accepted into an official program. The fact that you didn't realize only proves one thing. You judged him based on prejudice, not responsibility. Balance scale. The entire room was silent. A few younger pilots lowered their heads quietly. One female pilot near the door gave a small nod, her eyes reflecting admiration toward Leo. Frederick paused for a moment, then declared, I am calling for an immediate internal investigation into Captain Ingrid Hallberg's conduct and a full review of Nordsky's anti-discrimination protocols. This is no longer a matter of one individual, this is about the integrity of the aviation industry. And with that statement, the once heavy atmosphere, thick with bias, began to lift, replaced by something else. Awakening. The air in the pilot lounge was so heavy it felt as though time itself had stopped. Every gaze, every breath was fixed on the man standing firm at the center of it all, Frederick Albrecht, Executive Director of the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, and the father of the teenage boy who had just been so mercilessly humiliated. After Frederick ordered the immediate suspension of Captain Ingrid Hallberg, the entire room seemed to sink into a whirlwind of silence, shock, and collective awakening. Ingrid, once a model of discipline and seniority in the aviation world, now stood stripped of everything, her face pale, her eyes hollow. In mere minutes, she had drained away years of professional respect through actions fueled not by protocol, but by prejudice. Her words, if I had known he was your son, I wouldn't have handled it this way, were the final drop not just for Frederick, but for everyone in the industry who understood that a pilot has no right to judge another human by skin color or background. Two security officers stepped forward. Their expressions were stern but no longer arrogant. One of them spoke. Captain Hallberg, by order of Director Albrecht, you are hereby suspended from duty pending formal investigation. Please leave the flight crew area immediately. Ingrid didn't resist. She knew that before Frederick and in the face of the undeniable evidence, no excuse would matter. As she walked out of the lounge, no one spoke. No one said goodbye. Colleagues who once admired her now bowed their heads, their eyes filled with disappointment. Some younger staff turned away, unable to hide their second-hand shame for a figure who had fallen so far. Leo Albrecht, the 16-year-old boy who had just been crushed beneath the weight of public discrimination, still stood there. His face was calm now, but his eyes could not hide the wound left behind. He felt no satisfaction from this so-called sweet revenge. On the contrary, what flooded his heart was a storm of emotions, indignation, relief, confusion, and a cold realization of how easily everything had unfolded simply because he was a boy of color who dared to walk into a room deemed not for him. As the echo of Ingrid's footsteps faded down the hallway, a soft voice broke through the stillness. You're Leo, right? He turned. A female pilot with cropped hair and a commanding presence in her seasoned uniform stepped forward. It was Captain Elena Moreau, one of Nordsky's most respected senior captains, known across the industry for her advocacy of racial and gender equity in aviation. Elena gave a warm, grounded smile. My name is Elena. I saw everything. And I want to say I'm sorry on behalf of the profession we both love. But I also have a proposition. I'm flying to Lisbon in an hour. If you'd like, I'd be honored to have you join me in the cockpit. So you know you do belong there. Leo froze. The emotions that had just begun to settle rose again, this time as a lump in his throat. He turned to his father, eyes asking a silent question. Frederick gave a gentle nod, pride shimmering behind his steady gaze. Go, son. You belong to the sky. And the sky never discriminates. Leo nodded. He followed Captain Moreau, walking past the very people who had doubted him, who now lowered their eyes in quiet shame. Every step he took was a step away from fear. A step closer to his dream. For Leo, the humiliation, the pain, the unshed tears were no longer scars. They were the beginning of a new journey. And so, the boy who had once been cast out of the pilot lounge now walked steadily toward the cockpit of a real aircraft, not as a misplaced guest, but as a future pilot in his own right. The Boeing 787 bearing the emblem of Nordsky Airlines stood tall and majestic on the runway, preparing for its journey to Lisbon. The European sky stretched above in a soft blue hue, brushed with wisps of thin white clouds as if welcoming a new beginning. Inside the cockpit, everything gleamed with the glow of control panels, hundreds of buttons, dials, and electronic displays alive with steady pulses. It was a world of precision, power, and dreams. Leo Albrecht stepped into the cockpit behind Captain Elena Moreau. He held his breath not out of fear, but sheer awe. This was no longer a flight simulator or a photo in a textbook. This was real, and he was standing in it on his own 2 feet. Elena turned to him gently. Have you ever sat in the captain's seat before? Leo shook his head slightly. She smiled. Then today is your first time. Please have a seat. Leo sat down in the captain's chair, a seat that, for most, required thousands of hours of training, rigorous tests, and relentless determination. His hand reached toward the yoke, trembling slightly, reverently. Elena took her place beside him, calm and composed. Do you know why you're sitting here today? She asked. Leo looked at her, hesitated, then shook his head. Because this is where you belong. And because I want you to remember dreams don't belong to a skin color or a birthplace. They belong to those brave enough to hold onto them with their whole heart. Leo bit his lip. Emotion swelled in his throat. But he didn't cry. He had cried enough. Now was the time to breathe deeply, sit tall, and look forward. Elena began the start-up procedures, explaining each step with clarity and patience. Leo listened intently, not missing a single word. His hands were no longer trembling. His eyes were clear, focused, determined. As the aircraft slowly taxied toward the runway, his heartbeat synced with the hum of the engines. And in the moment the plane lifted off, Leo felt something indescribable, a soaring of the soul. As if his very dream had taken flight. He looked down at the world below. All the fear, doubt, and humiliation were now just small, distant dots. Up here, above the clouds, he wasn't defined by anyone else's story. He was simply himself, a young soul with an unshakable love for the sky. Once the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Elena turned slightly and smiled. You know, once someone told me I would never become a captain just because I was a woman. An African. But I'm here. And you'll be here too, Leo, if you stay true to yourself. Leo nodded, needing no further words. Inside, a fire burned bright, not a distant dream anymore, but a clear path forward, one step at a time. When the flight circled back to land, everything unfolded like any other commercial journey. But for Leo, this was the moment that changed everything. He was no longer the boy who had been cast out of a pilot lounge. He was Leo Albrecht, an apprentice of the stars, beginning his ascent toward the sky on wings of his own. And as he stepped out of the cockpit, he turned to look back, not to say goodbye, but to promise. I'll return, not as a guest, but as a pilot. As Leo Albrecht stepped out of the cockpit, the golden light of the setting sun spilled across his face, making his eyes shimmer as if reflecting the vast sky he had just touched. He paused for a moment in the pilot lounge of Hamburg Airport, his hands still warm with the memory of the controls, the buttons, and the heartbeats shared with a real Boeing 787. It wasn't just an experience. It was a declaration. But not everyone looked at him with admiration. From a distance, a group of airline staff and pilots walked past, their eyes flicking toward Leo, not with contempt, but with a kind of discomfort, even guilt. These were the same people who, just hours earlier, had stood silent as he was humiliated by the cruel words of Rebecca Whitmore, once a respected senior captain. Now that silence echoed as a wound across the room. Yet Leo didn't resent them. He understood. Silence, more often than not, isn't agreement, it's fear. A fear planted by a system that had trained people to stay quiet. But Leo was no longer alone. And that changed everything. In a corner of the terminal, Christoph Weber, director of communications for Horizon Airlines, waited for Leo alongside a group of journalists and youth organization representatives. News of the incident had spread like wildfire. And now, the whole of Germany was watching the story of a 16-year-old boy once mistaken for a threat, and now rightfully vindicated and honored. Leo, are you ready to answer a few questions? Mr. Weber asked gently. Leo looked at him for a second, then nodded. He wasn't seeking the spotlight, but he knew, if he stayed silent now, people like Rebecca Whitmore would continue to use power to hurt others like him. Young, minority, and full of dreams. In front of cameras and flashing lights, Leo didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to impress. He simply spoke. Calm, steady, and true. I'm not an exception. There are thousands of young people like me. Sons and daughters of mechanics, nurses, immigrants, who carry dreams in their hearts, only to be underestimated by prejudice and bias. All we ask for is a fair door to be opened. Silence. Then applause, but not from the public crowd. From the back of the room where veteran pilots stood quietly, the very ones who had once said nothing. The first to step forward was Elena Moreau, who placed her hand gently on Leo's shoulder. Kid, she said, voice warm, you don't have to be a pilot yet to deserve the sky. You just did something not every adult dares to do. You stood up for the truth. At that very moment, an internal memo was sent out by Horizon Airlines. Rebecca Whitmore officially terminated. The memo included a statement from the executive board. All forms of racial or social discrimination will be dealt with strictly. It wasn't just an apology to Leo. It was the beginning of real change. That evening, back home, Leo opened his acceptance letter to the elite aviation training program for outstanding students. He had read it dozens of times. But tonight, the final line hit different. Deeply, we are not just looking for those who can fly planes. We are looking for those who carry dreams and never let them go. Leo smiled softly. The sky might still be far, but now he knew the path to it belonged to him. And from far above, the sound of an aircraft engine echoed into the quiet Hamburg night. Like a promise, tomorrow another set of wings will rise. Fearless, unstoppable. A few weeks after the incident at Hamburg Airport, Leo Albrecht was no longer just a name. His story, a 16-year-old aviation enthusiast who was humiliated, doubted, and nearly stripped of his dream, had spread across Germany and beyond. International media called him the boy who touched the sky, and to countless young people, Leo became a symbol of resilience, justice reclaimed through intellect and unwavering courage. At the European Aviation Authority, EAA, headquarters in Frankfurt, a special conference titled The Future of Aviation, A Sky for All, was held. Leo, though still only 16, was invited to speak, the youngest keynote speaker in the event's history. He wore a simple white shirt. His face glowed, not with pride, but with purpose. In the audience sat hundreds of aviation experts, professors, students, and senior industry officials. When Leo stepped onto the podium, he didn't read a prepared speech. He simply told his story, honest, raw, and deeply human. I'm not here just to talk about humiliation or being doubted. I'm here to say that the system has a flaw. And if we don't fix it, people like me and countless others whose names we'll never hear will continue to be its victims. The room fell silent. Then, like a wave breaking, applause thundered, not out of pity, but in recognition of bravery. After his talk, Leo was approached by major organizations, airlines, flight schools, and youth foundations. Some offered scholarships, mentorships, even ambassadorships. But Leo declined most. He only kept one thing, a promise to himself. I'll train to become a real pilot. Not to prove someone wrong, but to prove that a boy who was once dismissed can fly. Meanwhile, Leo's father, Marcus Albrecht, now publicly recognized as the man leading aviation reform efforts across Germany, signed a historic agreement with major airlines. The pact required companies to implement unconscious bias evaluations and launch cultural sensitivity and equality training for all aviation personnel. Rebecca Whitmore, once considered a guardian of flight safety, quietly left the industry. The media stopped speaking of her. And so did Leo. As he said in a televised interview, I don't live to take revenge. I live to open doors for those who come after me. 1 year later, at a small regional airport in southern France, a group of students stood in awe as they were introduced to a real airplane cockpit. A shy boy of North African descent raised his hand, hesitantly asking, "Can I really become a pilot, even if no one in my family has ever worked in aviation?" The instructor, a black female pilot with a nameplate that read Captain Amara Johnson, smiled gently and tilted her head. "Have you heard of Leo Albrecht?" she asked. He once asked that same question. And today, he's about to graduate from the top flight academy in Europe. The boy's eyes lit up. And just like that, the dream passed on. Like a winged echo rising once again into the open sky. The following autumn at the Toulouse Aviation Academy, often called the Harvard of European Aviation, Leo Albrecht entered his second year in the civil aviation training program. Step by step, he wasn't just learning how to fly aircraft, but how to remain calm in emergencies, how to work as a team with the crew, and most importantly, how to carry the weight of hundreds of lives every time he left the ground. But Leo wasn't just known as an outstanding student. He had also become the founder of the Phoenix Project, a social initiative he launched to support and guide underprivileged youth, especially immigrants and young people from minority communities in Europe who dreamed of a future in aviation. With backing from the European Aviation Authority, EAA, and several major airlines, the Phoenix Project offered free courses on basic aviation knowledge, airport simulation visits, and small scholarships for talented students who lacked resources. When asked why he chose the name Phoenix, Leo answered, "Because it's a symbol of rebirth from ashes, from pain, from humiliation. I was once buried in prejudice, but I rose from it. And I want others to be given that same chance. Leo's initiative quickly gained momentum, especially after his quiet, heartfelt appearance on national television. His words, unpolished, unscripted, spoken simply from the heart, moved millions. Within just 6 months, the Phoenix Project had expanded to 12 European countries, partnering with schools and non-profit organizations to help build a bridge between dreams and reality for the next generation. During a visit to the Lisbon chapter of the program, Leo stood before more than 300 teenagers from across Portugal. He shared his story, from being humiliated in a pilot lounge to the moment his father appeared and changed everything. No one spoke when he finished. Then a boy of Angolan descent stood up, his hand trembling from emotion, and asked, "If I've been rejected, if I've been pushed away, how do I still believe in my dream?" Leo looked at the boy, then stepped down from the stage. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, quietly but firmly, "They might reject you, but don't ever let you reject yourself." The entire hall stood up. Applause thundered. Later that night, back at his dorm, Leo opened his journal and wrote, "I used to think I was just another in a long line of people hurt by indifference. But today I saw clearly I'm not a victim. I am the flame. And a flame, if it's not extinguished, will spread, warming, lighting, and leading the way." Nearly a year after the incident at Frankfurt Airport, the name Leo Albrecht was no longer just known within the aviation community, it had spread across society. The image of a teenager once thrown out of a pilot's lounge due to prejudice, then later walking into a cockpit with quiet defiance, had become a symbol of hope, inspiring thousands of young people across Europe. But for Leo, life wasn't a series of moments basking in glory. He still woke up at 5 a.m., attended theory classes, trained on flight simulators, and spent hours in the air with instructors. In the rare quiet moments between training, he ran the Phoenix Project, now an officially registered nonprofit with over 60 volunteers across Europe. Even so, Leo knew that his success was still an exception. There were thousands of others, perhaps more talented, more passionate, still being shut out of their dreams because of their skin color, their name, or where they came from. That's why when Leo received an invitation to speak at the European Aviation Policy Forum in Brussels, an event bringing together lawmakers, airline executives, training organizations, and industry leaders, he didn't hesitate to accept. At the plenary session, when invited to speak on diversity and inclusion in pilot training, Leo stepped onto the stage in his student uniform from the Toulouse Academy. He began with a true story. "When I was thrown out of a pilot's lounge, no one asked if I was a student. They looked at me and decided I was an intruder. They called security. They searched me in front of dozens of strangers. And if my father hadn't been the head of the aviation authority, I might have ended up blacklisted forever. How many young people have been labeled that way with no one to speak for them?" The hall fell completely silent. Leo continued, "We talk about fairness, but are opportunities really distributed equally? We speak of safety, but can silent prejudice erode the very foundation this industry is built on? If we want safer skies, let's start by training people who respect others before we teach them how to fly planes." When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. Several policymakers approached to shake his hand. A female HR director from Scandinavian Airlines wept as she shared the story of her adopted black son and thanked Leo for speaking the truth so bravely. A week later, the EU Aviation Commission formally issued a policy recommendation to reform pilot recruitment and training, mandating the integration of unconscious bias training in all flight academies. The Phoenix Project was chosen as a strategic partner for consultation and advanced education. That night, in his small room in Toulouse, Leo checked his inbox. One message caught his eye from a 14-year-old girl in Istanbul. "Dear Leo, I never thought someone like me could become a pilot. But today, I believe I can. I've signed up for the free Phoenix Project course. Thank you for lighting a lantern in the fog." Leo sat still. His eyes stung lightly. Then he smiled, a soft, grounded smile, and typed his reply. "You don't need to be like me. You only need to be yourself and hold on tight to your dream. The sky is always wide enough for those who dare to believe." The following spring at Toulouse-Blagnac International Airport, early sunlight filtered through a veil of thin clouds, casting a golden glow over rows of training aircraft neatly lined up on the runway. A final flight test was about to begin for graduating pilot trainees, and among them was a name that many were watching closely: Leo Albrecht. No longer the skinny, anxious teenager once humiliated by suspicion and prejudice, Leo had now become a true aviator, earning every hour of flight time, both simulated and real, through determination and discipline. On his crisp white uniform was the emblem of the Toulouse Aviation Academy, and on his chest, a silver badge marking him as a graduating cadet. Today's check ride was a one-way flight from Toulouse to Nice, observed directly by 2 senior examiners from the European Aviation Authority. In the control tower, instructors and technical staff watched intently. In the waiting room, Leo's father, Richard Albrecht, still a high-ranking official within the EU Aviation Authority, sat in quiet anticipation, pride shimmering in his eyes. Inside the cockpit, Leo completed his final checks on the control panels. Next to him sat his co-pilot and close friend, Eva Meyer, a sharp-minded Dutch trainee known for her precision and calm demeanor. They exchanged a nod. "Ready for engine start," Eva said. Leo smiled. "Let's fly." The engines roared to life as the ATR-72 training aircraft rolled toward the runway, preparing for takeoff not just to Nice, but toward the opening chapter of Leo's new life. In the sky, the aircraft flew steadily. Leo's hand flew confidently across the controls. His voice was calm and professional as he communicated with air traffic control. He not only executed the flight with technical excellence but responded flawlessly to an unexpected emergency scenario created by the examiners, a simulated loss of engine pressure. His response was immediate, steady, and precise. Working in sync with Eva, he navigated the aircraft to safety, earning quiet nods of approval from the observing judges. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway in Nice, Leo's voice came through the cabin speaker. "This is trainee pilot Leo Albrecht. We have landed safely. Thank you for flying with us." On the tarmac, the examiners said nothing at first. But as the cabin door opened, one stepped forward and shook Leo's hand firmly. "We've tested hundreds of cadets. You're among the rare few who don't just have the skill, but the strength of character. Congratulations, Captain Leo Albrecht." The cabin erupted in celebration. Eva threw her arms around him. A crew member captured the moment on camera, and that photo would later hang in the Toulouse Academy's Hall of Honor, a young pilot holding his flight cap, standing on the stairway of his aircraft, the endless blue sky behind him. That evening, at the graduation ceremony, Leo stepped onto the stage to accept his diploma amid thunderous applause. When invited to speak, he looked around the hall, at his parents, his fellow cadets, his instructors, and the hundreds of new trainees watching intently. His voice was steady, deep, and clear. "When I was a child, I was thrown out of a pilot's lounge simply because I didn't look like someone who belonged there. But today I stand here not for revenge, but to remind us all. The sky has no fences. Every dream can take flight if we are brave enough and given a fair chance." The entire hall rose to their feet in applause. Years later, the name Captain Leo Albrecht would become a familiar presence on flights across Europe, in keynote speeches, and especially at youth career programs where he stood beside others who had once been like him, repeating a message that never changed. Wings alone don't keep us in the air. Justice does.